So for those just joining us, we are coming on the tail end of the lightning round, the time when you're learning about examples from the field, systems in operation serving up environmental information. Next in the agenda would be Tom Lupo of Department of Fish and Wildlife to discuss the Biogeographic Information and Observation System, also known as BIOS.
Great. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I'm Tom Lupo. This is State Department of Fish and Wildlife, right? Just to be clear, this is not federal. About a year and a half ago, we were renamed from Department of Fish and Game, which was our previous name for 150 years, to something that confuses the public to make us think we're feds or something. It's odd there. All the wisdom of the legislature. What I'm going to talk about is BIOS, and interestingly, BIOS is kind of like the old guy on the block here. BIOS is probably 12 years old, I want to say. I think it sprung to life around 2002, 2003, something like that. And what it is two things, really. It's a data library. Not a catalog, not a discovery place. It's an actual data library of data spinning on disks that are housed in our data center that are available for use in a lot of different ways. And then there's the front of the house, right? Back of the house is the kitchen, front of the house is the dining room. The front of the house here is the tool, the web interface that allows you to access that data, right? So that button. Okay. So as I say, 2002 was when it began life, and this is old school. This is ArkServer running on all proprietary software, SQL Server, ArkSDE, Windows. You know, all due respect to Paul Ramsey, we're a pay-as-you-go kind of organization. BIOS, as I said, has been around for a really long time. It's public facing in the sense that it's available on the internet, but it's really intended for the scientific community, or at least the citizen scientists that are out there. It's gets something on the order of 200 or 300 unique launches per day, so it's a highly utilized utility. As far as the front of the house goes, that tool that you see, we've been evolving this and continuously evolving this over time so that it's basically a fully functioning GIS on the web. It's not just a viewer, it's not just a poke at a spot, what's here, or what's that feature, or what's this about. You could do spatial queries, you could do attribute queries, you could do a little bit of sophisticated analysis, or I don't want to say the M word, modeling, but you know, we're starting to get to that point where this is a tool that's developed and evolved specifically for the biological data that we serve in here, right? This was built as the Department of Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife's enterprise GIS for where all of our biological resource data was going to go. Right? It was intended initially just for our own use. Turns out a lot of other people find this to be a useful thing as well. So of the something like 800 data sets that are in here now, something north of 800 unique data sets that are in here now, only a percentage of them come from my department. There's Fish and Wildlife Service data there, there's Forest and Service NRIS data is there, USGS data, local government, there's lots of folks, NGOs, the California Native Plant Society, lots of folks are finding this a good place to put their data. 800 data sets. Not all of these are equally popular, right? Some of these get used on a day-to-day basis. Some of these fall much more in the kind of archive category, let's call it, or what we call write-only databases, meaning they get written to disk once and maybe nobody's ever going to read them again. But they're there. At least they're secure and they're documented and they're ready to go. The primary data set that's in here, the reason that most of those 200 or 300 unique launches come to this site for is for something called Natural Diversity Database. It was, Christine mentioned it in EcoAtlas. Natural Diversity Database is a program that's been around for pushing 40 years now. This is the California edition of the NatureServe heritage methodology. So this is mapping the location and condition of rare and endangered species around the world, really, or around the Western Hemisphere at least. So as I've said, BIOS is a tool that's a full-fledged GIS that's customized to work with the biological data that's in there. So here's an example. This is a little bit of a messy display to see here, but Natural Diversity Database is a messy database to work with. It's something like 19 different tables with multiple feature classes, very dense mapping. It's a beast to work with it. But we've tried to simplify it here so that one can zoom into an area. This is the delta, obviously. You could do a spatial query to narrow down to a particular area. You could modify that with an attribute query to say you only want listed species, or you only want animals, or you only want things that have been seen within the last 20 years, or whatever your conditions happen to be that the data supports it. Press go, and then it'll produce a report for you. Right. This is a report that is very, very commonly used in all kinds of CEQA and timber harvest plans and NCCPs and any kind of environmental work. Basically, you need to produce one of these reports and consult with it. And then you can go further and make a map out of that. This is all thin client, right? You don't have anything loaded on your desktop. This is all happening over the web, right? So optimized. What this allowed us to do is to stop distributing the data. NDDB is something, more than 100 megabytes at this point. And we used to, in the old days, it would be floppy disks. Remember floppy disks? Anybody here under 30 remember floppy disks? We stack a floppy disk, then CDs, then DVD. Now it's all online. We don't distribute pretty much anything anymore. So this tool is optimized to make that data useful. Another data set that is critically important to us and people go to and the BIOS for all the time is for vegetation mapping. One of the other programs within the Department of Fish and Wildlife is VegCamp. Todd Keeler-Wolf, if any of you know him, and his team do large-scale, high-attribute, high quantified accuracy assessment vegetation maps for the state. And vegetation translates into habitat. So here's an example of vegetation mapping that was done in the Delta. Thanks to Department of Water Resources, or maybe partly to blame by Department of Water Resources, depending on how you look at it. The Delta is the most heavily mapped postage stamp of California that there is as far as vegetation goes. We've done it something like 5 different times for them because they're monitoring and looking for change over time and whatnot. So here's just a quick shot of the vegetation. Well, this translates pretty readily into habitat suitability for a particular species. So if you wanted to model favorable conditions for restoration or what have you. So in this case, salt marsh harvest mouse. All right. So take-home messages. One of the things. Ray, does this slide look familiar to you? I think this was one of your slides from years ago. Yeah. So important thing to know is that BIOS is a mature system. It's bound for a really, really long time. It's permanently funded. It's key to my department's centralized data management infrastructure. It's not going anywhere. It's bought and paid for. But it's also available as a collaboration tool, meaning we've built lots of custom views into this for essential habitat connectivity, for cowfish, for desert renewable energy conservation program, and on and on and on, where people just basically load up the data that they want into BIOS, save a bookmark, which literally is like just what it sounds like, a bookmark. That's a URL that you could then build into your own web sites or documents or email around or what have you. So it's here, it's open for business. If you've got biological data that you're looking for a place to park and you don't want to spend money building your own system, let us know. We're probably going to be interested in working with you on this. Okay? Thank you. Questions?
Hi, Barbara, NOAA Fisheries. Is there a timeline style feature in there that if you have historical data, you can look at the trends over time?
No, not within BIOS per se. Some of the data sets do have a long time series that they would actually support that kind of view, like breeding bird survey, for example, is a great example of that. Consistent methodology over decades of time. The data's in there, but we don't have any specific tools regarding timeline per se for that. Good, interesting.
I have a question.
Okay.
So marine BIOS, that's a new thing that emerged about a year and a half ago. What's the relationship between what we saw up here and then marine BIOS?
Right. So it's branding is the only difference that it really is. It's absolutely the same infrastructure. It's the same software. It's the same people. It's just that BIOS traditionally has been terrestrial based, right? That's where most of the data is, frankly, and so the BIOS had that. There became lots of issues within my department over MLPA and marine reserves and whatnot, so we needed a place to start putting marine data, so we created marine BIOS. It's the same thing. It's just, when you load it up, it zooms in on the ocean rather than on the land, and it preloads all the marine data. That's why I say this is a pretty flexible tool. We could use it for all kinds of things.
Thanks, Tom.